This is Mamuni. Thank you so much for being Amar Baba.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I am going to discuss how to solve a trial balance problem. In this particular trial balance problem, closing stock will appear in the trial balance, but opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. So let's get started. Chalo, shuru kara jak. Now let's go through the problem. The trial balance of Mamuni as on 31st March 2022. Name of accounts are given here. The amounts of debit columns are given here. The amounts of credit columns are given here. The total of the debit column is 3,30,000. The total of the credit column is 3,30,000. So the trial balance did tally. But they have asked us to prepare a trial balance because there are some errors. So let's detect the errors and rectify the errors. Understood? Let's see the first account. The first account is cost of goods sold 1,45,000. So what is cost of goods sold? Well, the expenses involved in producing, purchasing, processing and delivering a sold product is known as cost of goods sold. In other words, cost of goods sold include only the cost it took to make the products that sold for the year. So how to calculate the cost of goods sold? Let me show you. Now see the calculation of cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is equal to opening stock plus purchases minus returns outward or purchased returns plus direct expenses minus closing stock. Understood? This is how cost of goods sold is calculated. Okay. What are direct expenses? Direct expenses include wages, carriage or carriage inwards, freight, manufacturing expenses, dock charges, import duty or customs duty, octroi or royalty. What is direct expenses? Direct expenses are expenses incurred in purchasing the goods or bringing the goods to the godown or factory, and manufacture of goods are called direct expenses. Okay, now let's go back to the problem. So let's write cost of goods sold 1,45,000. So cost of goods sold 1,45,000. Why cost of goods sold is debit? Because cost of goods sold forms the part of the cost of sales for the current accounting year. The nature of trading account is nominal. So, cost of goods sold comes under nominal account. It is an expense for the business. So, according to nominal account, all losses and expenses debit. Here, cost of goods sold is an expense for the business. So, cost of goods sold will be debited. Understood? Now, let's see the next account. The next account is opening stock 60,000. But remember, opening stock will not appear in trial balance. Normally, opening stock always appear in the trial balance as a debit balance. But here, opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. Why? Because opening stock will not appear in the trial balance as a debit balance because opening stock account has been closed as a result of adjusted against cost of goods sold. যখনই ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্স প্রবলেমে কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ড থাকবে তখন ওপেনিং স্টক উইল নট অ্যাপিয়ার ইন দ্য ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্স। আন্ডারস্টুড? যখনই প্রবলেমে কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ড ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্সে অ্যাপিয়ার করবে তখন ওপেনিং স্টক উইল নট অ্যাপিয়ার ইন দ্য ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্স। We'll write a short note below the trial balance. Opening stock will not appear in the trial balance because opening stock account has been closed as a result of adjustment against cost of goods sold. কেন? এ দেখো, কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ড যখন ছিল, ওপেনিং স্টক আমরা ইনক্লুড করে নিয়েছি অলরেডি। ক্যালকুলেশন অফ কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ডে অলরেডি ওপেনিং স্টককে আমরা ইনক্লুড করে নিয়েছি, অ্যাড করে নিয়েছি। সো ওপেনিং স্টক প্লাস পারচেজেস, সেটা কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ডে কি অ্যাড হয়েছে? ওপেনিং স্টকও অ্যাড হয়ে গেছে, পারচেজেসও অ্যাড হয়ে গেছে। তো কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ডে ওপেনিং স্টকও ইনক্লুড হয়ে গেছে। তো অলরেডি অ্যাকাউন্টটা ক্লোজড হয়ে গেছে, আর ওপেনিং স্টক নেই। অলরেডি কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ডে আমরা ওপেনিং স্টকটা অ্যাড করে নিয়েছি পারচেজেসের সাথে। তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক অলরেডি ক্লোজড, তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক আর নেই। তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক will not appear in the trial balance. যখনই কোনো ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্স প্রবলেমে কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ড দেওয়া থাকবে, always remember opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. Calculating cost of goods sold, we have closed the account of opening stock by adjustment against cost of goods sold. তো সেই জন্য ওপেনিং স্টক আর আসবে না। Understood? What is opening stock? Opening stock is assumed to be that part of the stock which will be sold in the current year along with the new purchases. তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক অলরেডি ক্লোজড, তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক আর আসবে কি করে? অলরেডি দ্য কাউন্ট অফ ওপেনিং স্টক is closed, so opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. While calculating cost of goods sold, opening stock has already been included. তাহলে ওপেনিং স্টক ক্লোজ হয়ে গেছে, আর ওপেনিং স্টক আসবে না। আন্ডারস্টুড? যদি কস্ট অফ গুডস সোল্ড ট্রায়াল ব্যালেন্সে দেওয়া থাকে, ওপেনিং স্টক will not appear in the trial balance. Please remember, what is opening stock? Opening stock is the stock of goods in hand at the beginning of the accounting year. Understood? In other words, the stock of goods remaining unsold at the end of the previous year is termed as the opening stock of the current year. Understood? So opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. Instead, you'll write a short note regarding opening stock. So what will you write? So you will write opening stock will not appear in the trial balance because opening stock account has been closed as a result of adjustment against cost of goods sold. Understood? Let's see the next account. Debtors. Debtors has been wrongly written in the credit column. So let's rectify debtors and let's write 55,000 in the debit column. Debtors 55,000. Why debtors has a debit balance? Because debtors falls under personal account. According to personal account, the receiver of the benefit is debit. Here, debtor is the receiver of the benefit. So debtors will be debited. Let's see the next account. The next account is cash. Cash has been written correctly in the debit column, 45,000. So let's write cash, 45,000. Cash has a debit balance and that is the reason we have written 45,000 in the debit column. But why cash has a debit balance? Because cash falls under real account. According to real account, what comes in is debit. Here, from the business point of view, cash comes into the business. So cash account will be debited. Understood? Let's see the next account. The next account is creditors. Creditors 25,000. They have correctly written creditors in the credit column 25,000. So let's write creditors 25,000. Creditors has a credit balance and that is the reason we have written creditors in the credit column. Why creditors is credit? Because creditors falls under personal account. According to personal account, the giver of the benefit is credit. Here, creditors is the giver of the benefit. So creditors will be credited. Understood? Now let's see the next account. Next account is closing stock. Closing stock 35,000. Normally, closing stock does not appear in the trial balance. Do you remember? Normally, closing stock does not appear in the trial balance. But here, closing stock will appear as a debit balance in the trial balance. Why? because of cost of goods sold. Whenever there is a cost of goods sold account in the trial balance, always remember opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. Why? Because the account of opening stock has been closed while calculating cost of goods sold. But closing stock will appear as a debit balance in the trial balance. Why? Because closing stock has been deducted out of the purchases account. Understood? In such a case, closing stock will appear in the trial balance. আমরা কোথায় ডিডাক্ট করলাম? আমি তোমাদের শো করলাম how to calculate cost of goods sold. Let me show you again. See, cost of goods sold opening stock plus purchases minus returns outward or purchase returns plus direct expenses minus closing stock. So closing stock has been deducted from purchases. That is the reason closing stock will appear in the trial balance. আমি যদি ডিডাক্ট না করতাম ক্লোজিং স্টককে তাহলে কি হতো? I would have written closing stock in the trial balance. I would have written twice. That means purchases ও লিখছি আবার closing stock ও লিখছি because closing stock is a part of purchases. So since we have already deducted closing stock from purchases while calculating cost of goods sold, তাই closing stock twice appear হচ্ছে না because already deduct করে দিয়েছি purchases থেকে. So সেই জন্য closing stock will appear in the trial balance. So remember, whenever cost of goods sold account is given in the problem, opening stock will not appear in the trial balance because the account of opening stock has been closed as a result of adjustment against cost of goods sold. আমরা cost of goods sold calculate করেছি, opening stock এসছে, সেই জন্য ওপেনিং স্টক ইনক্লুডেড হয়েছে, সেই জন্য ওপেনিং স্টকের অ্যাকাউন্ট ক্লোজড হয়ে গেছে। বাট ক্লোজিং স্টক কেন আসছে? বিকজ why closing stock will appear? While calculating cost of goods sold, we have deducted closing stock from purchases. Understood? Remember this thing because closing stock will appear because closing stock has been deducted out of the purchases account. That is the reason closing stock will appear in the trial balance only when cost of goods sold account has been given in the problem. Otherwise, closing stock will never ever appear in the trial balance. Understood? Why closing stock is appearing in the trial balance? Because we have already deducted closing stock out of the purchases account while calculating cost of goods sold by debiting the closing stock and crediting the purchases account. Closing stock debit to purchases account. Understood? So the summary is whenever cost of goods sold account is given in the problem, opening stock will not appear in the trial balance because the account of opening stock has been closed as a result of adjustment against cost of goods sold. Rather, while calculating cost of goods sold, we have taken opening stock. We have added opening stock. Okay. But closing stock will appear in the trial balance whenever cost of goods sold account has been given in the problem because we have already deducted closing stock out of the purchases account, debiting the closing stock and crediting the purchases account. Understood? Closing stock 35,000. Closing stock 35,000 has been wrongly written in the credit column because closing stock has a debit balance because closing stock is an asset. So let's rectify closing stock by writing 35,000 in the debit column. Closing stock. $35,000. Closing stock has a debit balance and that is the reason we have written 35,000 in the debit column because closing stock is an asset. That is the reason closing stock has a debit balance. Understood? Now let's see the next account. The next account is sales. 1,95,000. They have correctly written 1,95,000 in the credit column. So let's write. So sales 1,95,000. Why sales is credit? Because sales comes under real account as well as nominal account. According to real account, what goes out is credit. Here, when goods are sold, goods go out from the business. So sales account will be credited. According to nominal account, all incomes and gains credit. Here, when goods are sold, cash comes in. So sales is an income for the business. So sales account will be credited. Understood? Let's see the next account. Capital account, which has been wrongly written in the debit column. Capital has a credit balance. So let's rectify and write capital in the credit column. Capital 80,000. Capital has a credit balance, and that is the reason we have written 80,000 in the credit column. Why capital has a credit balance? Because capital comes under personal account. According to personal account, the giver of the benefit is credit. Here, the proprietor is the giver of the capital. So, capital account will be credited. Let's see the last account. The last account is bad debt. Bad debts has been wrongly written in the credit column. So, let's rectify bad debts and let's write 20,000 in the debit column. Okay. Bad debts. Bad debts has a debit balance. Why? Because bad debts falls under nominal account. According to nominal account, all losses and expenses debit. Here, bad debts is a loss for the business. So, bad debts will be debited. Understood? Well, you have to write a short note like closing stock number 1 for opening stock number 2. I've already told you what to write. Why closing stock will appear and why opening stock will not appear. Write a short note. Okay. Let me tell you once again. Closing stock will appear as a debit balance in the trial balance because the closing stock has been brought into account through adjustment against cost of goods sold account. That means closing stock has been deducted out of the purchases account. And that is the reason closing stock will appear as a debit balance in the trial balance. Okay. Number 2, opening stock will not come in the trial balance because the account opening stock has been closed as a result of adjustment against cost of goods sold. Okay. Because while calculating cost of goods sold, we have added opening stock. Okay. Now let's calculate the total of debit column as well as the total of credit column. Okay. And let's see if the trial balance tally. So the total of debit column is 3 lakh. And the total of credit column is also 3 lakh. So the trial balance did tally because the total of debit column is equal to the total of credit column. So the trial balance did tally. But this is an exceptional trial balance where closing stock will appear in the trial balance but opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. So please remember, whenever there is cost of goods sold account, always remember closing stock will appear in the trial balance but opening stock will not appear in the trial balance. I hope you understood. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your precious time. I sincerely hope this was useful. And before I fade out, please remember, treat everyone with politeness, kindness and respect. Not because they are nice, but because you are a good human being. Bye-bye. Take care. Stay safe and stay blessed always.